Well, Liz, thank you very much for joining us and for all the work you're doing, to explore what people can do, that have got chronic illness when they're considering work. It's really important that there's material out there for us to refer to and use, as we decide for ourselves. So I'll let you take it away if you want to introduce yourself and share your presentation. That would be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Rose. Yeah. No, I'm honoured to speak here today. I am really passionate about this topic. It's one of those topics I sort of do some work in, and then I find it quite hard going. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should, just go and do something else. And I just keep coming back to it. It just keeps drawing me in. So here I am about 5 years later. And my own experiences of becoming unwell while I was working, and sort of having no framework to not just with the health diagnosis, but within the workplace to navigate that experience, I think has played a huge role in where I am today. And I ended up going back to university at the point where I was a lot better health-wise, to explore it more and to learn more about chronic illness management, and especially managing that alongside work. And yeah, I think I just keep following one section at a time, and it leads on to the next thing. So at this point, I've just finished my master's, and that was on long COVID, but that was because there was sort of sufficient research done to sort of hang the work aspects on that population of people. And I think I probably have enough now. I'm hoping to do my PhD. So I've actually applied and I'm waiting for the outcome. I think I have enough for the PhD to actually have people with ME as well as people with long COVID in order to continue on the research that I was doing and to really expand it. So yeah, I absolutely love this area. There's huge need. Very few people are doing anything in this space, and I'm just, I guess, even though it's been a bit of a up and down journey for me, and there's been quite a bit of heartache and different things going on. I've sort of gotten to the point now where I'm glad in a sense, because I sort of see it as something that will be able to help others in the future. So I will share my slides. Building a sustainable career. I think that's where I got to. Is I guess a broader picture, so not just having the workplace accommodations and the return to work program, because sometimes even in best laid attentions, the illness itself is so dynamic, it's fluctuating, worsening, it's all over the place, and even those intentions can sometimes not work out. So what I'm curious about and what my research involves is looking at the long-term picture of how people with ME can sustain a career over a lot longer period of time, and what that might look like, and the things to consider around that. So that's just a little bit about where the direction I'll be talking to you today. And a little bit about me. I've already explained. I have lived experience with ME, which sort of started this whole me sort of on this pathway. And yeah, all the main symptoms such as post-exertional malaise, which is obviously the big one that was confusing me for several years, and everything that goes alongside that. So I live my life very differently now, depending on sort of what works for me, and if something's not working for my health, I sort of tweak it a bit. But that sort of started about would have been over 10 years ago now. But other than that, I live in Christchurch, and I've got my husband and son. He's just about to turn 2. So the last couple of years have been busy with all of that. And we have 4 cats, and I love cats, so that's probably the other passion I have in life. So this is probably the one and only photo I have of the 4 of them together. But yes, they keep us busy. So to start off with, I like to think about the whys, the whats of something. So this question of getting employment, really understanding why we want to work before we tackle how that's going to work, how that's going to come about. And research has provided a lot of consistency in terms of participant responses about why they want to work. So the big one is to provide financial needs. Obviously, that's what our whole society hinges on. But also social connections, having that place that sort of connects them into the community, and spending so many hours at work, it's such a significant part. And that purpose and meaning that work brings to people, to their identity, particularly an identity around our societal expectations to be independent, to be providing for yourself, and at the same time providing work that continues throughout the community and the country and in the world, really. It's quite global these days. And so all of these reasons are like foundational as to why we want to work. But I would actually, like, having stood back and looked at all these reasons, there are others, but they do boil down to these 3. That I would actually boil it down further to status. Work is very defining of our status, and particularly in our culture. And that's something to be very aware of, is status. It's very defining for ourselves, our families, our personal health, but it's also very much defined by the culture that we live in. And so in New Zealand, we're a capitalist society for probably the most part, probably becoming more capitalist, I would say. And a problem with that, it's really an ideology, is that we tend to put all the emphasis on the individual to be responsible for themselves. But then if it's not working out, then we also automatically blame that individual. And it ignores the fact that the status that we have in society is very much into this whole complex set of interactions from things that are far outside of our own personal lives. This is Ruben, by the way. Can I say hello? Hi. Sorry about yeah, so with status, you've got the community that you live in, you've got the resources that that community has access to that could be due to geographical location, very much what the government of the day is doing. There's all these factors that contribute to our own state of health, our own financial well-being, and it's not just about the individual. But unfortunately, in a capitalist society, people sort of like to overlook all of those other aspects that are working away in the background. And if you're unwell, if you're not able to work, then that is your problem. And interestingly, I was talking to someone at WINZ who I think they're sort of like one of the regional sort of next layer of managers. And it seems like the WINZ philosophy is that the only way to get out of poverty is to be employed or to work, which obviously I see the logic in that. But at the same time, not everyone's going to be well enough to work. And that kind of ideology and that philosophy automatically feeds into, if you're not working, then that's a you problem that you can fix. And if you haven't fixed it, then that's up to you and no one else, which is completely, like from my point of view, that's completely unfair because there's this, and people didn't ask to be unwell. And so it is, the more I sort of think about why we want to work and how that feeds into our status and our quality of life, ultimately, there is a fair amount of factors going on outside of our control. And so that's something I keep in mind when I'm exploring all these, like, why do we want to work? What kind of work accommodations? Is also what's happening in behind the scenes. It's not just solely about your efforts, there's other factors influencing that. And this sort of comes back to hierarchy of needs, that we have different needs that are really prioritized. So this model is very popular these days. It's American psychologist Abraham Maslow who first, I suppose, designed the concept of it, and that was, I think, 1943 that he did that. And nowadays, it's used quite widely, and this I find it really a good way to think about how our needs, we have like the primary needs, which you'll see on the pyramid there are the foundational needs, the physiological needs, where you need access to oxygen, food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep. You just can't function without those. And then you have the needs going up the pyramid that are more your secondary needs. So the bottom layer is about your survival needs, and then above that is about your needs that contribute to your overall quality of life. So ideally, you get to the top of the pyramid, you have the best quality of life ever. But of course, this is all the theory. It doesn't necessarily happen like that. But I find it a good way to think about it, particularly if you are someone with severe ME and your priority at the moment is those foundational primary needs. You'll see, I'll put the arrow there, that the secondary needs, the second layer, health and employment, yes, they're very important, but they're also the secondary needs. So yeah, it's about sort of thinking, what do I need right now, today? And is those needs consistently met? And then if they are, then you can sort of move on to the next stage and looking at what you can do to improve quality of life. We know that from research, probably one of the biggest areas of research with ME is the fact that they have such a reduced quality of life in comparison to people with other chronic illnesses. And so this is always an area that I think people miss a lot of the time. They sort of think, oh, just go get a job, go sort it out, without realizing, well, hang on a minute, the quality of life is already so low for a number of people with this illness. And if they're struggling to, for instance, get food into themselves every day, of course you're not going to be thinking about work. You haven't even got that health aspect, let alone getting your daily needs met. So I use that as a bit of a framework moving forward into the conversation around the unemployment and employment. issues that we need to consider. I will just stop briefly and say, if you would like to ask any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or we can do it at the end. Totally up to you. Feel free to ask questions along the way, and I will stop and do my best to answer those. So now, there we go. Yeah. Right. So what we know about ME and employment, not a lot, I'll be honest. There's very few studies specifically about the employment situations and experiences with people with ME. And so based on the studies, which are very few that I've been able to look at, that indicates that it's a roller coaster, which it's sort of very up and down as the symptoms fluctuate and as your ability to function is impacted by that fluctuation. So I think based on other studies of episodic disabilities, that's a good theory to have until we can actually verify that through some actual research. I will explain. So an episodic disability is a condition just like ME. It's something that fluctuates and it's unpredictable. Like you can't control necessarily what's going to happen. Sometimes your body just goes into overload and overdrive, and you just experience these worsening symptoms and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And then other times you might be feeling like, oh, I'm going along, it's okay. And, that can be weeks or months, even years, and then people have another relapse. So it is very much up and down, and that is something that does come up with when we're looking at careers of people with other chronic illnesses, and that episodic, so episodes, where it sort of moves from one episode to the next, which makes it really difficult because employment is built under this idea that you can consistently turn up to work every day and work the same hours, and you do that and nothing ever changes, which is an interesting theory in and of itself, why we operate under that assumption. And so I can say that even though we don't really know much about the unemployment figures of ME at all, very difficult to find recent data or any data. There was a study who has had a look at it and has a range there of 39 to 69%. I would say that that range is very large, and that to me indicates it's large because they just don't have sufficient data to have an accurate estimate. And what we saw with long COVID was they started out by saying how many people with COVID went on to develop long COVID, and the range would be massive. It'd be like 5% to 80%, and you're like, well, that's pretty much meaningless. But as they got more and more research, that number really narrowed down, and I think it's around 10% now. And so I think if there was a lot more research done on ME and people who are employed versus people who are not employed, we'd actually see that figure get closer to whatever it might be. 69%, and probably also there's a degree of the different types, the different severity of ME. So is it mild, is it moderate, is it severe, is it very severe? We don't know that data breakdown. But I mean, it's giving an indication that it is like unemployment in itself is a huge issue that people with ME face. And 24% of New Zealanders describe themselves as disabled. So they always talk about sort of a quarter of the population, and that's all disabilities together. And the latest statistics from Statistics New Zealand have found that nearly 56% of people who are working age, so that's 18 to 65, with disabilities, that they don't participate in the labour force. And so that essentially that means they might not be termed or classified as unemployed because there's a very, very strict definition for how Statistics New Zealand calculates the unemployment rate. But presumably, I think there's quite a high likelihood that these people are not able to participate in the workforce because there's so many barriers, so many difficulties around getting work accommodations. So a lot of them just end up not being, they either just don't work, they're supported by family, or they can't work. But that number is very high, 56%. I've got the numbers for, so 56% of working age people with disabilities, compared with only 15.3% of non-disabled people. So there's a huge gap in the non-disabled people who are not working. There's probably multiple reasons for that, but with the people with disabilities, we know from research that the vast majority want to work. So the issue is not a lack of their desire to work, it's a lack of opportunities for them. Yes, so on that note, I will just touch briefly because I'll give the slides to Rose to send out, so you can refer back to the slides and see other details that I don't cover. But just a quick note on the illness disclosure in the workplace. And from what I've seen in the research, because this is an area that it's sort of difficult to navigate, like are you going to be discriminated against if you do? Or you might not be. You might get an amazing manager or an organisation that really helps you work out how you can do a job in a way that protects your own health. So on the research, it seems like either people, they got really amazing benefits from disclosing their health illness condition, or they sort of were on the other end of the spectrum and not being validated and finding themselves sort of shut out from a job in the end. So it is sort of very much about thinking how, like, if you're in a workplace at the moment and you're trying to make that decision, what do you know about that workplace that would suggest it is going to be beneficial or it's going to sort of be damaging for yourself. So, I mean, it can be difficult because sometimes you just have to disclose it, particularly since they want a reason around why you might be taking sick leave or taking medical appointments. But it also can often result in you being quite exposed, a loss of privacy for yourself, and because there is an imbalance of power with the employer, that can result in a loss of agency as well. So yeah, I would say proceed with caution, and sort of, yeah, what are you thinking about your own individual situation? I can't really speak to there being one way or the other that works. But if you do disclose it, there are two strategies, and both of them sort of different stages of your illness. So you've got the planned return to work and the workplace accommodations. So the planned return to work is really for those in the initial stages of being unwell. And so obviously with ME, it's difficult because it's not an easy road to get diagnosed. So this is all very theoretical. I think in practice, this doesn't really work because people they don't know that they have ME. They're just unwell and they don't know what's happening. But in theory, if you have a look at the return to work phases that have been conceptualized sort of just as a model, there are four sort of distinct stages, which is to have an initial period off work on sick leave or whatever leave, a re-entry. So once you've come back from sick leave, you're re-entering into your job position, the maintenance phase of having that job carried out consistently according to whatever the terms and conditions are that you've worked out. And then career advancement is sort of assuming that the illness has actually gone away, essentially. That's sort of what it's implying, is that you can't really advance your career until you've sort of worked through the illness, which again, like in theory, this sounds wonderful, but in practice, it's a different thing entirely. So there is something to be said that if you did become very unwell at the very early stages and you've agreed to take, say, a month or a few months off work and then begin a very gradual re-entry, and I mean gradual as in like 2 hours a week kind of gradual, then your body may have sufficient time to recover, and you do get to that point. But it seems to be a very low percentage that experience that fortune. So I would say the vast majority of people move into the category of addressing workplace accommodations. So they have been unwell for a while. They know sort of a bit more about what's going on in their health. And it's about sort of discussing those needs with the employer. In order for it to be successful, the employer, first of all, needs to be understanding of chronic illness and needs to be validating. So if you don't have that foundation, it does seem like it's near impossible to get any work accommodations. So that could be your employer or your manager. That doesn't necessarily need to represent the organisation as a whole. But the manager is the person that you directly report to, is essentially my definition. And they have a huge impact on your job outcomes and your own well-being at work. And that goes for anything like, any kind of workplace situation. So the same with the workplace accommodations. You need someone who's really on board with you. And if you have that, then it's that opportunity for you to talk through the privacy considerations to protect yourself. You don't need to disclose it to your colleagues. You don't need to disclose it to other departments. And it's really important to be aware of all that. And then the more practical elements, such as having your own space, being able to work from home, being able to take breaks, they're not checking up on you, that, like, why aren't you working while you're having a break? All of those practical elements, even like if you're able to work from home, then that's cutting out that commute time. All of that can contribute to the success. But it does seem like the foundation of all of that success relies on your direct report, your manager, being validating of what you're going through. I would say everything hinges on that. So if they don't validate you, perhaps that's when you can start to sort of think about more broadly, is it best for you to stay in this role? Is it better to look for a different role, look for a different career even? So I'll check my time. Okay. So employment considerations, as I've sort of raised, the severity of ME really does play a huge part in what's realistic. You don't want to commit to something that then is stressful, and then that undermines your own health, even if they're giving you a workplace accommodation. It's really about what is going to be the best for your health, and the length of illness as well. And I guess that, if it's been going on for months or years, you've probably got a much better idea at that point about knowing like yourself and what ME looks like for you. Even though it's unpredictable, there's some you sort of like get a hunch about what's going to be too much work or what you can manage. Employment considerations around symptom management can be quite varied. If it's a job that's going to escalate your symptoms, then maybe that job needs, like, if you can't do that job without that particular task, maybe it's time to consider a different position, and it might be a different position within the same organisation. An example is I really struggle to do a lot of driving. And so any roles that involved a lot of driving, and those kind of roles are like support workers, people working like in nursing, district nursing, the couriers, all of those kind of roles that just like extensive driving, well, it might not work for you because ultimately you could have all the workplace accommodations, but probably the main issue is that that task is creating too much demand on yourself physically and cognitively. So it's sort of like working through that process around being realistic. And I know it's hard. I mean, I always find myself being too optimistic about, and then I get in a couple of months and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It's not working out too well for me. So it's hard to sort of work through that process and try and be like realistic when you want to do it and your body's like, no. The other thing is around your own beliefs and the beliefs of the people that you work with. People don't necessarily think about that, but some people, some organisations expect you to be, if there is such a thing, in perfect health. And they sort of don't have any allowances for anything other than that. Then that's going to be a barrier to, if that's their philosophy, it's going to be really difficult to work with that because you don't need to be in perfect health to work. But, something to sort of think about and question, and maybe you believe that yourself. And so just working through how these things will impact the job that you're doing or a future job. And sometimes being in an organisation is not good for your health. Just say that. Don't stress yourself out more. But again, for me, I know, like personally, it's a whole process of me like letting go because I like to like fight and make it better. And that seems to be, I guess, that perfectionist tendency that we see a lot. People with ME, the people that just, they put their heart and soul to everything they do, and the body's just decided, no, not going to do that anymore. So just briefly moving through the sustainable careers concept, it's really about thinking, what are the options available to you that give you meaning, that you're able to determine, like through your own choice, and you're able to do more or less continually. So for me, as a practical example, I've been doing the study. I've sort of gone through the different stages of study. And I haven't done that continuously, like every day, but I've done it with breaks. Obviously, they have semester breaks, which helps. So you take a few months off and then you start again. But over 5 years, that has pretty much become sort of something I can do sustainably. So it's sort of standing back and seeing those options for yourself. Perhaps like reflect on the last few years and what's worked for you, what hasn't. I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It's quite theoretical. But the other thing to keep in mind is all the other influences that can either progress or hinder your career. And if you're in an organisation that, say the leadership might sort of inherently have this belief people who are chronically ill are less productive or less valuable, that's a problem because that's going to permeate the whole culture of the organisation. It might not. You might have this amazing manager that stands apart from that culture. But then you might still run into issues with, say, HR. So I'm like, oh, no, this is our policy. So it is something to be really aware of when you're thinking about how to make your current job or a future job work, is that organisational context. Because it is really important. I found it to probably be the most important factor as to whether I stay or leave a job. I will just quickly go through. I might just leave that and go through the questions to ask yourself, because sometimes it's sort of about that fight. We like fighting for our job. We're fighting to make it work. And I guess my what I've learned for myself is taking a step back and thinking, okay, well, if it's not going to work, and I'm not going to say it isn't, I'm just like, well, what might actually work that I hadn't thought about before? And I think nowadays with the internet, with the we've got all these different like platforms for freelancing. There's all sorts of things going on in the world that's really opened up opportunities, particularly remote opportunities, which is amazing. And so thinking about how those things can perhaps give you a different kind of work to do. And thinking also not just about you being able to do the work, but whether that work pays, whether it's going to give you that sustainable income. And again, that's not going to happen overnight. But I've provided this list of questions for you here as something you can reflect on, and you can just look back to the slides, because for me, what I found is I've been able to develop sustainable work over longer period of time, and found work that actually is very sort of meaningful, but also works really well with my health, with my lifestyle, with a family. And yeah, it's not necessarily easy, because we do have this very fixed idea, even the way that we get raised as kids, go and get a job and then work in that job, and pay the bills. But it's sort of like thinking outside of that to see, are there other possibilities that might be better for your own health. But in terms of jobs, there's absolutely still possibility to stay in mainstream employment. The hidden disability sunflower lanyard, I think it is I'm quite excited about that. That's fairly new, but it's not just New Zealand, it's more global than that. And look for that on organisation websites, because that's probably your first clue whether they're going to be a place that offers workplace accommodations. I've given here a few of the bigger organisations that I haven't worked for them myself, but from people's feedback, that they are good organisations in terms of giving diversity and inclusion, really looking after their people. But there's also a website link here you can check that out for a whole lot more organisations. And the other thing is the accessibility tick, which is a fairly recent initiative just within New Zealand. And so looking for that tick on the website is another indicator that this organisation could be open, and it's something that you can ask them about through like in the job application process. I would say that's safe. If they've got the tick and they don't want to talk to you about it, I would question why they got the tick in the first place. So in conclusion, sorry, it's been quite rushed at the end, but I just want to leave you with this sort of final note about going back to the pyramid and your needs, is that work is great, work is amazing, but it isn't your whole life. And it's about thinking, where are you located now, and what needs are most pressing for you, and to be okay, like that's okay if you're on the first level, if you're on the second, if you're on the third, it doesn't matter. It's about recognizing what's true for yourself. So feel free to email me with any questions. I will also just have a look at the chat. What do you suggest when applying for jobs? Do you disclose your medical details in a cover letter or at a job interview? I would not disclose it in the cover letter, just as a blanket rule. But generally, at the job interview, it can come up. If you're working with a recruitment agent, it could be a good idea to talk with the recruitment agent first and find out. If the recruitment agent has an issue, then then that's a problem. But generally, recruitment agents, they want to get someone into the job, right? So they are willing to sort of work a bit harder in that sense. So yeah, I think, yeah, I would keep it out of the cover letter based on the research I've looked at, but it is appropriate to, if you're comfortable, to talk about it at that job interview stage, or they might have a screening where you get asked, do you have any disabilities or anything that we can help you with? Hopefully that answers that question. And then I'm going to see a vocational career consultant. She's funded by WINZ. Just because I'm assuming the question is it going to create an issue being funded by WINZ? Because I think just because they're funded by WINZ doesn't mean they're going to act like WINZ in that sense. And I guess it's a good to test the waters and say, like, these are your needs, and see what their response is, because their response will be very telling as to whether they're on your side, and again, it comes back to, do they validate you? If they don't validate you, then ask for another one. Ask WINZ, can we have a different consultant to talk to? And you don't even need to state the reason why. Just say, I wasn't gelling with this person. I'm assuming that's what that question is getting at.
So maybe it's like going along to the meeting, with some notes around what work, what tasks and frequency of those tasks are manageable, likely to be most manageable, or what accommodations you might need in the workplace, like, somewhere to lie down in the middle of the day or something.
Yeah, I guess it's also, if you're looking at what are the options, like what kind of job could you work in, then, I mean, ideally that's what a career consultant is able to do, is sort of give you all the options. They might do some different tests for you or surveys to sort of narrow the pool of positions that might be appropriate. But yeah, I mean, or at any time, if you feel like you're being diminished in and of yourself and being like invalidated, being told, well, there's nothing for you, anything like that, then put the brakes on, because that's that's not helpful, that's not appropriate. And there are people obviously out there who don't get it. But you're fully in your rights to go and ask for another option. And yeah, and I think funded via WINZ, there's probably that ulterior sort of motive to get you off the benefit and into a job, but that has to be something that's going to be long-term sustainable for you.
But hopefully they're good with brainstorming options.
Well,
Yeah,
as I say, like a career
yeah,
consultant, you would
yeah.
hope that, that's ideally their craft. That's what they're, been doing. So hopefully
Mm.
but yeah, it doesn't always necessarily translate. I've always
Have
done.
you got some examples of careers or home businesses that people with ME have been able to sustain?
That's
Mm.
actually going to be one of the topics in my PhD.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Based on talking with other people, it's sort of around that, particularly working from home, that ability. People who are in jobs where, so not contact-based jobs, where you're required to, say, be on a phone line, go visit people at set times, but on jobs that you can put down and pick up and do, like when you're feeling better, such as writing, all of the kind of like IT graphic design kind of, um, yeah, or even like things that would be around policy, those kind of jobs where you're not required to be at a certain place at a certain time, are really good, because that gives you flexibility. And really, I think what we need is flexibility to when we're not feeling the best or our symptoms are overwhelming us, then we can put it down and it's okay. So it's sort of like looking for those opportunities. So one thing I do is cat sitting, which I think someone mentioned it in one of the Facebook pages. And again, it's really whether you feel up to being able to meet that commitment. But the thing about that is I don't have to go to visit the cat at 9 a.m. every day. There's in 99% of my clients, it's very flexible. It could be 9 a.m., it could be like 12. And so that really allows me to sort of pop it in when it suits me. So yeah, it's really about that flexibility and autonomy in any kind of roles where even if it's remote, working on a phone line, they're very rigid. And it's thinking what's going to give that flexibility. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I know a number of people have workers, support workers, really from doing video calls and consults from home, and they have a lot of flexibility around that. So
yeah,
that's been
yeah, it
great.
probably depends, doesn't it?
Mm.
Are you saying that the people who are the support workers have flexibility?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
they
okay.
can schedule the times of their calls and things. Yeah.
Yeah, it probably depends. I've only worked for the the bigger organizations where
Mm.
it's not flexible at all. It's just
Oh, right. Yeah.
yeah, but it probably would definitely depend. And that's one thing I will note is larger organizations are much less able to be flexible than the small organizations. So if you can, try and prioritize like a smaller organizational business. Yeah. Okay, one o'clock. Sorry, that was very, very rushed, but I hope that's been helpful.
Yeah, there's one more question there. I've always done physical work and can no longer do that. So wanting ideas, what I
Mm.
can do with my limits. E.g., I want to be able to work 4 hours at some stage.
Yes. So again, sort of starting at that baseline of what other work do you enjoy doing? So work that's doesn't have that physical element? Is there some hobby that you like? So some people like, watching movies. Some people hate it, but use that as a wee clue to then follow through and do some exploration around what careers there might be, because there's all sorts of careers out there I didn't even know existed. And so, yeah, just perhaps spend some time reflecting on what are the things that you really enjoy. Is it things that like listening? Do you enjoy writing? Do you enjoy being creative? There is so many different options, but it's just a case of that, and that brainstorming can happen over quite a long period of time as well. And it might, yeah, if something sort of piques your interest and you think, oh, I wonder if there's a career about that, probably there is. And so it's just sort of like doing the research into what the career might look like. But yeah, it is something that's hard when the physical work is what you have done in the past, and presumably that's what you love. So yeah, sometimes it's sort of thinking, well, what else do I love in my life that might potentially be turned into something that generates income.
There might be some options around plant care, or
Yeah.
just working outside
Yeah.
in a perhaps a more quieter way.
Yeah, people grow plants and sell them on like Facebook Marketplace and all sorts. Like really amazing. I will just say, I listen to quite a few podcasts on, and it's not tailored for people with disabilities or people with ME, but it's just got a lot of advice around what kind of businesses people started. So I could pop that link. I might email that link to Rose.
Yeah.
There'll be a couple of podcasts there. Yeah, good for ideas.
We've already shared Liz's website, so there's a way to contact her if you've got any particular questions, and if something comes to mind later on, or you actually want to work with Liz, so you keep that as an option. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Liz, for coming along today and just leading us through some thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reflection of our situation is important, isn't it? And it's all got to start with that. And those questions that you've given us are good prompts. We can be dwelling in what we can't do a lot, and it's good to have some questions that might lead us out of it, into the next step. So thank you very much. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a real privilege, Rose, and
Okay.
I'm here if anyone wants to chat or email.
Okay. Thanks everyone for joining.